Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, September 6th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start kind of wrapping up all of the Week 2 previews, just some under-the-radar games that I just want to dive into really quickly. We'll do a little bit of a rapid fire to start the show. Then we'll get into the players and coaches that are under the biggest microscope going into this week. There are a ton of big-time games, and with that comes a lot of pressure on some different players and coaches around the country, so we'll get into that in segment 2. Then we'll get into Tommy's best bets. This is something that I probably should have started a little bit earlier on in the season, but I'm going to give out 8, 7, 6, somewhere around there, that amount of bets every single week, and we'll see where I land at the end of it. I'm not a betting man myself, so we'll see how this goes overall. But then we have questions heading into Week 2. There are tons of things after Week 1. You tend to have a big-time regression or progression to the mean in Week 2 and kind of want to figure out where that's going to come. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of a weekend headline. There were a ton of things happening around the Big 12 and UConn, the House settlement, all the other stuff that I definitely want to update you guys on today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat at the bottom of the to use the super chat at the bottom of the sports network chat. You can see that little $sign there. Click on that, put your name in at any question that you'd like, and it will pop up on the screen. We can have a fun back and forth here. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to keep up with the chat on the side, so anytime you can use that makes life a little bit easier for us and definitely more interactive, which is definitely what I want. Again, you can also use the GSMCpodcast.net page, still up and working and does the exact same thing. So whichever one you're more comfortable with, absolutely utilize that. And then we can have a little bit of a discussion here, which is always fun. But let's get into these under-the-radar games. We've gotten into all of the big games throughout the week. We got into Texas-Michigan. I do have Texas winning that. We got into Nebraska-Colorado. Got Nebraska in that one. We got to Tennessee-NC State. I have Tennessee kind of rolling in that one. But there are a ton of other games that I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking because maybe they're not the most interesting games in the world, at least from face value, but we still have plenty to look forward to in these. And it starts tonight with BYU versus SMU, Friday at 7 p.m. This one is going to be a ton of fun because I think everyone's coming in saying SMU is the more talented team. They're at home. That's the way this game is going to go, and the line obviously shows that. But BYU has something that SMU just does not have, and that is one quarterback. They know exactly who their guy it is, Jake Ratzlaff, and I think he's a very talented kid. I think he was someone that last year came out of the gates very shaky, was very young, trying to figure out his way, but once he's gotten into his second year starting, I think he's going to be a lot more comfortable. And then you have Chase Roberts on that side, who is one of the most complete, terrifying wide receivers in the entire country that you might not know the name of, but very talented kid and could cause all types of problems for that SMU back end. I like SMU a lot. We saw much more of Kevin Jennings in Week 1 than we saw in Week 0, so I would expect that that's your quarterback going forward, but it's very much in between. I'd pick SMU to win this game, but I think it might just be ugly and come down to the wire in this one. Duke Northwestern is a really fun game because it's going to be really ugly. I'll be totally honest with you. Northwestern's favored by 2.5 right now, over under at 37.5, but this is kind of a test for college football fans. I always love these games late at night on a Friday where you have Duke against Northwestern, or you have, in past years, Vandy against Northwestern. I hate to do that, but the reality is there's always these types of games pretty much every week where if you watch this game, you are officially a college football freak. There is no coming back from that. You officially joined the cult of college football, and welcome to the club. It's great to have you because it is going to be a very weird quarterback matchup in this one and kind of a very fun one in some ways. It's going to be gross football, don't get me wrong, but I think we might just have some fun watching the dichotomy between these two quarterbacks. Malik Murphy is your typical pocket passer. He is not going to leave that pocket unless he absolutely has to. Can make plays with his legs if absolutely needed, but definitely not a feature of his game that you would write home about. Miles Wright on the other side is going to be able to do that. That's the way that he wants to go about business, is not going to be able to push the ball downfield the same way Malik Murphy is. So I think I'm going to pick Duke to win this one. I think this one, they're going to find a little bit of stuff on offense on Saturday or tonight, and I think they're going to have the ability to get just enough points. It's going to be ugly, don't get me wrong, but I think the Blue Devils win tonight and at least start their season on a relatively good note of beating Northwestern away. Baylor at Utah. So this one should be a conference game, right? But it's not. It sounds like this one was set up before Utah had joined the Big 12, had joined the Big 12. So they're going to play this one out as an out of conference schedule. I think Arizona Kansas State is another one to watch for in a couple of weeks that has the same exact circumstances. So not going to hurt Baylor if they were to lose this game. And I think this is a great test for Utah in a lot of different ways, because the big question that everyone has, including myself, going into the Big 12 schedule for Utah is, do they have the physicality to do what they did in the Pac-12 in the Big 12? Because, as we know, Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, all very, very physical teams, and I don't think there's that big gap between Utah and everyone else when it comes to that category. Baylor's a good kind of idea of where you stand. If you can hold up against Baylor, if you can take the fight to them, especially with a Dave Aranda defense, you're going to be in good shape, because Baylor might not be the greatest team in the world by any means, but they are definitely not going to be soft. They're not going to hand you a lot of things. They're going to tackle relatively well and at least make life tougher than it would be against anyone normal. So I think this one's going to be fun. Daquan Finn is the most dynamic player on the field. I just think Utah has like the next 5. So I think Baylor is going to be a little bit shocked here. I think Utah is going to want this one to be on the schedule for the Big 12, because I tend to believe that Utah is going to be able to roll in this one. This is a game that everyone's just got to tune into. I'm being totally honest. This is a game that's going to define one of the conferences in the Group of 5 for a very long time this season, and possibly decide who goes to the CFP from the Group of 5. These are two AAC teams, two teams that are right around each other in the odds to win that conference. UTSA just a nudge above Texas State in this, but at the end of the day, this is one of those games that's going to be just so much fun. Whenever you see a line that's absolutely even, you just love to see it, because it's a great game. It's two in-state rivals going at each other, a conference game. So this is kind of a pseudo group of 5 battle for Texas. It's not Texas A&M, but it's right there with them. It's a very, very fun in-state matchup that I think deserves a little bit more love. Jordan McLeod is the quarterback for Texas State, coming over from JMU, and they got some things to clean up. There's no doubt about that. UTSA was definitely the cleaner team in week 1, but I think the difference making of Jordan McLeod stretching the ball, or extending plays and making plays with his legs, is just too much. And then Owen McCown on the other side, yes, that McCown kind of wild, but Owen McCown on the other side makes this a really fun quarterback matchup. I'm going to lean Texas State in this one. I am very, very nervous about this one. I think it's going to be incredibly close, but I'll take Texas State to win this one and possibly set themselves up for an AAC title run. USF against Alabama, we got to talk about, because I think everyone's looking at this line at 31 and saying, this one last year was very, very close, and I understand so much is different around Alabama than what it was a year ago, and they're finally going to start the guy that they probably should have started a year ago, but Saban had to send his message, that's for sure. But I do think this is one of those games where usually in these games you have a quarterback that is trying to do what he needs to do, get out by halftime, and stay healthy. That's the goal for these quarterbacks usually. It's not going to be the goal for Jalen Milroe on Saturday. I can almost promise you that. I think he's going to walk on that field trying to prove a point, because at the end of the day, this was the game. This was the game that entirely changed everything for him, where he had to watch as Tyler Buchner and Ty Simpson made a little bit of a mess of that game and let UCF hang around for a little bit longer than they should have. Now, I do love this USF team. I think they have so much talent. I think Byron Brown is one of those guys that put him on the field with any team in the country, he looks the part. He's so incredibly talented, and one of those guys that is just going to be incredibly fun to watch. I think USF can hang for a quarter and a half, maybe a half, but I think it's going to be ugly after that. I think Alabama's offense is going to get going. I think we're going to see some fireworks here, but I don't think Bama wants to see that by any means. But I do think we'll see a little bit, and I do think Bama gets it done. But let's speed up a little bit here. Oklahoma versus Houston. We've talked about this one a little bit over the last couple of days. Oklahoma favored by 4 touchdowns in this one, and I think it's just one of those week 2 matchups, right? We have a ton of them this week where one team played not so well in week 1, one team played absolutely lights out, and they might find their way back to the middle. I don't necessarily think Houston's going to be able to win this one, but OU is one of those teams that I think the offensive line is enough of a problem where some of these teams that shouldn't be able to play with you might have a shot because they make a couple of plays on the quarterback. Moving forward, another game that people are watching, Clemson App State. I think everyone is watching this one as an upset special, and frankly, so am I. Clemson is in a very weird spot because they played Georgia last week, looked absolutely terrible. It was Georgia, to be fair. Frankly, on the other side, I think they should be Clemson and be able to handle that. But at the end of the day, it was Georgia. It's hard to gauge how good a team is based on, especially in the ACC, based on when they played Georgia. But at the end of the day, I did a hot take yesterday talking about I think Clemson wins this game but does not find their offense. I don't think that's all that hot of a take at this moment, if I'm being totally honest. It sounded hot when I said it. I think this offense is just clunky. I don't think they have the quarterback to run what they want to run. I don't think they have the receivers outside to really scare someone, at least right now, with those freshmen still developing. It's one to keep your eye on. App State can absolutely pull this off if they can make this game gross and slow and be able to run the ball with Joey Aguilar and the myriad of running backs that they have. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be one of those games that Clemson walks out of it feeling or not so great, but with a win. They're going to walk out with a win, but then be like, we still have not figured out a lot of the stuff, and we have ACC games approaching very, very quickly. This is a great game. This late night slate really sneaks up on you and is going to give us a couple of games. The next three that I'm talking about, just going to be so much fun. And this is the main example I talked about earlier in the week. I think this might just be another OT game for Texas Tech in their second game. And I think that it's going to be tons of points. I think we're going to get up and down the field a ton. I don't think either of these teams could stop Molasses if they wanted to. It's going to be so much fun to watch these two teams go at it. Frankly, I'm terrified to pick either way on this game because I don't like either of these defenses, and the game could change on a dime. I think I would lean Texas Tech just because of what happened last week. I think they have the ability to bounce back just a little bit, but I don't like that pick at all. So I'm not going to touch that one in terms of betting, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a very, very fun game and one of those that might just keep you up just a little bit later than you want. Mississippi State against Arizona State is one that I absolutely love. I think you have a team in Mississippi State that everyone's talking about. They're the worst team in the SEC. They're not going to be nearly as good. Jeff Lebby getting into the conversation is going to take time. Arizona State on the other side has kind of built something in year two, looked really, really good in week one. And I think the biggest thing to me is the play caller special just jumps off the page. Kenny Dillingham versus Jeff Lebby is going to be downright fun. They're going to get up and down the field. They're going to go fast. They're going to make life tough on these defenses, and we're going to see points because of it. The over-under is at 58.5 for a reason, and frankly, I might just go the over on that one. But I think this is a great, great matchup. I think it's one of those where you'll find out just how far along Mississippi State is. Arizona State is not necessarily a big challenge or by any means or a great team, but at the end of the day, Mississippi State is going on the road in the second game of a head coach's career with a talented team, but is still a very questionable team. If they can go in there and get a big-time win, then a lot of stuff changes, not necessarily for this year for Mississippi State, but I think for long-term, it makes them feel much more confident in what they are comparative to what everyone else is around the country. So I am going to pick Mississippi State to win this game. I think it's a little bit gross, but I do think Mississippi State gets it done in what's going to be probably a little bit of a barn burner. And then finally, we got to talk about Boise State at Oregon, another one that everyone's pointing to Boise State saying this is going to be the point where Boise State possibly makes some noise, causes some trouble for this team. I think that's a real possibility, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, the story of the game is going to be, can Dylan Gabriel and can this offensive line dominate the way that likely they should be able to, and they should have been able to a week ago. So it's going to be one of those very interesting things that we're going to have to watch a little bit more closely. Maybe the box score doesn't show it fully, but maybe we see this offensive line look a little bit better or not, and then we have big-time questions going forward. I do like Oregon here. I think it's one of those things where Dan Lanning's going to have those boys ready to go, and they know that they did not do what they needed to do in week one, and they want to prove a point this week. So I expect them to win this one. I think Ashton Jainty is the most remarkable player on the field, but I think Oregon has about the next 10. I think they have the ability to, at the very least, stifle that just a little bit. So I think it's going to be a really fun week. I think it's one of those weeks that maybe it doesn't have those marquee matchups, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's got plenty of games that are going to be really fun to watch. And usually those weeks where you look at it and say there's not a ton on this slate, that's when you find some really, really fun games. So cannot wait for that, but let's take our first break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the players and the coaches that are under the biggest microscope in week one. Who has the most to prove? Who is everyone going to be watching? And who might just have some very aggressive opinions one way or the other on Monday morning, depending on their performance Saturday. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the under-the-radar games that we just didn't have quite a chance to get to during the week, but some really, really good ones. I cannot wait for that Oregon-Boise State matchup. Really excited for that UTSA-Texas State one as well. So, cannot wait for this weekend, but let's get into some players and some coaches that have a lot to prove this upcoming weekend. There are so many big-time games. There are so many moments where I think a lot of people's, this sounds a little bit crazy, I understand, but I think some people's lives can change this weekend. And it depends on what they do on Saturday, but I think a lot of things can change in some of these kids and coaches' lives if they can put together a really good performance. And I think it's one of those things where you look at all of the incredible players all across the country in these big-time games. I could put a spotlight on about 100 different people across the country, obviously, but I'm going to stick to some of the bigger games here, and Rocco Becht is a very interesting one to me. I think he's one of those players that you're walking into this game and all the talk is about how bad these offenses are. All the talk is about how this is going to be a rock fight and whoever can, just get that 3 yards on third down at the very end of the game is going to be able to win it. So it's one of those games where you have an opening, right? No one's expecting points. No one's thinking that this is going to be an offensive explosion. Rocco Becht and Iowa State have an opening here to do something that I think turned the college football world on its head a little bit, because not only has Iowa kind of dominated this series recently, but you're going into Kinnick Stadium. You have a very talented team going up against Phil Parker on the other side, which is going to be a handful for him to deal with. If they can handle all of that, if they can walk in there and put up points and get Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins in on the action very, very early, get Abu Sama going and score some points against this Iowa defense, this kid turns from someone that in passing, you might know his name but don't really know many details about him, to a household name in a second. This is a very, very talented kid and one of those guys that when he walks on the field, he can change a game in a second. He can do things with his legs that are really special. He has a comfort in this offense. He has weapons all over the field. So I think when you look at this game, obviously everyone's talking about the defenses, and that's what a lot of the NFL scouts will be there for. But if Rocco Becht can put on a show, I think he becomes not only someone that we talk about more in the college football world this year, but he becomes kind of an Iowa State legend in some ways. He becomes a guy that can launch them into places that they haven't been since Brock Purdy was there, and maybe even further back if they can find their way into the playoffs. So I think it's more of just kind of a message sender for Rocco Becht more than anything else. It's about showing that you are a player that is going to be a problem for any defense in the country, because frankly, if you're a problem for Iowa, you're a problem for everyone. I can promise you that. So it's going to be a really fun game, but then on the other side, Tim Lester's got to be able to match that, because we know that Rocco Becht is good. We know that Jaden Higgins is good. We know Jalen Noel is good. We know Abu Sama is good. We know that this Iowa State offense has dudes. You're going to be able to counter that. And Phil Parker is going to do a great job on the defensive side. But at the end of the day, Iowa's going to have to score points in this game. It's not going to be a game that they're going to be able to win 10-3. At least I don't think that's the way it's going to go. I think they're going to have to win this game by scoring somewhere in the 20s. I think it's going to be one of those types of games where Iowa State forces your hand just enough. Tim Lester is a very good OC. He's one of those guys that came down from the NFL and has has kind of melded the NFL approach to the Iowa approach, and it's made it really, really interesting because it's not all that different. The reality is what they want to do is they want to establish the run, they want to get that going, and then they want to attack the middle of the field. The biggest difference is the pre-snap motion and the different personnel groups that are attacking that middle of the field. It's wide receivers on the outside more often now than it was tight ends coming up the seam. So I think that's kind of the biggest difference here is you have an ability to not only throw the ball and not only stretch the ball around the field, but those running lanes get bigger because Iowa State has to spread guys out, has to be able to guard Reese Vanderzee and all of these talented wide receivers. So now that you have those guys, and now that you have a guy that is going to employ pre-snap motion and get those defenses just thinking a little bit more, I think this Iowa offense is going to be fine. I don't necessarily think it's going to be explosive or anything crazy, but all they really needed in the past was openings. All they really needed was that one linebacker to be moved out of the box by a motion across the way, and then you have a 7-yard run. I think that's the difference that he brings, and I think he's got to show it this week against an Iowa State defense that is going to be well prepared to take on this challenge. This is the number one guy in my opinion. I feel like this is bar none the number one guy, and it's not necessarily because of what this season has to hold, because obviously there's plenty ahead of him with Georgia on the schedule, with possible SEC, CFP aspirations. There's plenty on the table for this one, but I was listening to On Texas a couple of days ago, and CJ Vogel and all the guys over there were talking about this, and they said this is the draft game. This is the game where he proves that he is not only a really, really good college quarterback, someone that can possibly make it in the NFL, but you have questions about, to a guy that is a bona fide first-round talent. I think, to be honest, I do think he is a first-round talent. I think he's one of those guys that is going to get into the first round because the physical ability by itself gives you enough reason to feel good about this kid. The difference comes when he has to face those big-time defenses. And guess what? Wink Martindale's on the other sideline. A defensive coordinator that was in the NFL for so long, knows just about everyone in the NFL, and everyone in the NFL respects. So if Quinn Ewers walks up into Ann Arbor and puts up 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, is very good in completion percentage, and looks in total control of this offense, that's going to be the moment. That's going to be the moment that everyone brings up on tape when they're talking about Quinn Ewers in the draft process. They're going to say, he walked in there and showed Wink Martindale that you cannot stop me. I think that's the biggest thing here. So on top of that pressure, he has a chance this weekend to cement himself as one of the best quarterbacks in Texas history and get his big-time signature win away from home on top of that Alabama win. So he would become one of those players that you just never forget if you're Texas. And frankly, I think he might already be there, but I think if he puts together a win this weekend and then finds his way to possibly the playoff later on, he might just jump Colt McCoy. I don't know if he's getting over Vince Young, I'll be honest, but he might just jump Colt McCoy in that echelon of Texas quarterbacks. But a lot on this kid's shoulders. A lot of his future could be decided on Saturday if he can deliver the way that he very much wants to. Sherrone Moore on the other side has to be on this list because Sherrone Moore last year won big games for them. He was the head coach in the Penn State, in the Maryland game, I believe, and then the Ohio State game to finish off the season. So he's had big moments. He's been on the sideline, been the head coach for those 4 hours. Outside of those 4 hours, he was not the head coach. This is his team. This is his program. He is the head guy. He's the guy standing out in front. This is the game where he gets his first big win. And I understand the Ohio State and Penn State game deserve a lot of respect. And I'm not taking anything away from those games by any means, but I do think this is an opening for him to show that this is my team. It's no longer me just trotting out Jim Harbaugh's team to win some games. It's me taking over this team, changing it just a little bit, and making it my own, and we're still the same tough, hard-nosed team that you remember. So obviously this falls on, Kirk Campbell a lot as well, with how are you going to rotate quarterbacks, how are you going to go about the offense, so some more technical parts of that as well. But I think when you look at the big picture, Sherrone Moore is your head coach now. He has changed some things over the last little bit. There have been a lot of turmoil around there. If he walks out on that field and wins on Saturday, this is your guy for a very long time, because the amount of things that he's had to deal with early on in his career is absolutely ridiculous at Michigan, and being able to walk in against a team that very much expects to be in the playoff in Texas and just dominating them possibly on the line of scrimmage is going to make Michigan fans feel incredibly confident about what you have going forward. So it's all about the game plan, obviously figuring out how you're going to utilize these quarterbacks, but overarching than that, it's going to be a game that might just define his career at Michigan for at least the next little bit until he gets that next big game chance. But Deion Sanders is another one that we got to talk about, because we talked about all of the different variables around Colorado all offseason. You know, whenever you bring in a ton of different portal players, there's a little bit more variability of what you're going to get week to week. That's just the reality of college football at this point. Florida State showed that the first 2 weeks of the season. But I think this is one of those moments for Deion where he can show that he's doing the way he's doing things is not the wrong way. I think there's a great chance for him to prove that, because when you walk into Lincoln, Nebraska, and you play this team, you have to have toughness. You have to have mental, physical, and you have to have togetherness, which has been the big criticism of this Deion team. I don't necessarily buy into that quite as much as some people do, but there is an ability in some other teams to be player-led, to be really intense about those players going out and demanding the best from each other. That doesn't happen quite as easily on transfer portal type teams. It doesn't mean that it can't happen on those teams, but at the end of the day, this is a moment where he can walk into Lincoln, Nebraska with a ton of portal players against a team that has a ton of homegrown talent, that's one of those, very normal structured teams, and beat them and show the world and show everyone that they are tough, they are physical, they have that drive, they have that culture that a lot of people have said they haven't had in the past. So I think it's one of those moments where if they come out of this thing with a win, I'm talking very differently about Colorado. Not because, maybe the game goes totally different than I expect and, Nebraska plays the ugliest game in the world, but you have to have physicality to beat this team. Period. End of story. You know that the defensive line for Nebraska is going to be a problem. You know the offensive line is very experienced. You know that they're going to try to run the ball. If Colorado can win a game doing all of those things, then they're going to be a team that's going to be a problem in the Big 12, point blank period. I tend to believe that it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for them on Saturday, but if Deion and his boys can go out there and play really good football and be physical more than anything else, I'm talking about them as possibly winning the Big 12, no longer as a team that if they make a bowl game, they're feeling really good. So a lot on Deion Sanders' shoulders every single week, obviously, but particularly this week heading up to Lincoln. And then on the other side, he's got to deal with this kid. Dylan Raiola is very, very talented, but he is a freshman. This is one of those moments where he's going to have plenty of big-time moments throughout his career if he has the career that we expect. But there's this thing that happens with quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks when they're thrust into these big spots. They need that big win. They need that big first moment to get them going. They need that moment that makes them feel like they can take over this team and feel great about where they're going. It happened with Quinn Ewers against Oklahoma where they absolutely blew him out. From that day forward, that was a different quarterback. That was a guy that had way more confidence in what he could do on the football field. That was a guy that was way more comfortable in that system. And that was a guy that was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. That is what Dylan Raiola can do on Saturday. Now, it's a lot to put on his shoulders. I'm not doubting that by any means, and we'll get into that, I believe, in the next segment or a couple of segments here. But this is one of those moments. Nebraska fans have never been more excited. You're on primetime TV against a rival, against one of the most talked about teams in the entire country. This is the moment where you prove you are who everyone thinks you are. You are the guy that walked out with an almost perfect rating from high school, and you are actually that guy. It's not smoke and mirrors, it's not anything different. You are downright special, and this is the moment to show that. Nico Iamaleava, same exact thing. If he can deliver the way that he wants to on Saturday night, this is not only a kid that we're talking about in the future of NFL drafts, we're talking about him very, very quickly in the Heisman race. This is a guy that, he's one of those players that every now and then you find a guy that throws the ball with such confidence, that throws with such zip and preparation and all of the different things that you want in an NFL quarterback, and you just get enamored. You fall in love with the mechanics. You fall in love with how clean everything looks. This could be that weekend for a lot of people. I think whenever anyone watches Nico Iamaleava throughout this year, they're going to see him and be like, is there anyone on planet Earth that can play quarterback better than this kid? Because he jumps off the page. It's really remarkable to watch him go to work, and I think this is that moment where a Heisman run can start, an SEC run can start, a playoff run can start, but it's all come down to this kid. Can he deliver on Saturday night? And if he can, then a lot of people are going to be saying that name on Monday. I can promise you that, or trying to say that last name on Monday. Tony Gibson on the other side is going to have his hands full. A very, very good defensive coordinator for NC State that has been around the block a number of times. And Dave Dorn and him are really a match made in heaven because they play hard-nosed football. That's the way they go about business over at NC State. And I don't think they're going to be scared of the physicality of Tennessee. I don't think that's the way that Tennessee's really going to hurt them. Now, I do think Tennessee has the advantage there, but I think NC State's going to be relatively up to the challenge with their front seven. The back end is going to be a problem. There's almost no doubt about that. And frankly, I think he's going to have to blitz a lot in this game, so it's going to be even more of a problem. You're going to have to make sure that those guys are ready to go. So it's one of those moments that I understand it might be a little bit overblown, but he's playing a Tennessee team that we've seen can put up points against essentially anyone in the country. We've seen what Nico can do. We have all this hype going one direction. If Tony Gibson goes out there, puts together an incredible game plan, and that North Carolina defense just totally stops the Tennessee offense, this is a guy that's up for a head coaching job at the end of the year. So, again, like Quinn Ewers in the draft and possibly changing his life this Saturday, another guy that can change his life this Saturday is Tony Gibson. And I don't know what his long-term plans are. I don't know if he's very happy in Raleigh and wants to hang out there. But at the end of the day, he's one of those guys that has been really good for a really long time, just hasn't had that moment where their defense just plays really well against opponent where you would not expect that by any means. And if he can do that, then his life could change forever in a hurry on Saturday. But going to be so much fun to watch all these guys. A couple other ones to watch: Taylon Green against Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman on the other side of that game, and then Dylan Gabriel has a ton on his shoulders going into that week, going into that game against Boise State. But a ton of teams, a ton of players, a ton of coaches under a microscope in week 2, and we'll see how they respond. It's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold, but let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my best bets for this upcoming weekend. I have about 8 for you today, and we'll keep track of this throughout the year and see just how good I can do in this betting world, but we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the players and coaches under a big-time microscope in week 2. I think Quinn Ewers might take the cake on that one, going up to Ann Arbor with a lot on his shoulders, not only for this season, but possibly some draft implications in this one as well. But going to be really fun to watch that unfold. Let's get into some of my best bets for the week 2 slate. I think this is something that I'm going to do throughout the year, kind of keep track of where I'm at, what my record is, and if you want to follow me, you're more than welcome to. I want this to be known. I am not a betting man. I never really have been. I've watched this game just because I'm a weirdo and I really just love watching the game more than anything else. I watch games that do not matter to me and I don't have money on. It's one of those things that makes me a little bit weird in the college football world. But at the end of the day, I do think these are a couple of bets that I feel pretty good about. I do think these are bets that definitely have a very good chance of hitting. I don't want to say anything too crazy, but at the end of the day, if you do take my advice, you're more than welcome to. But just don't blame me if things go wrong, because I am someone that is still getting used to this betting game myself. But let's get into this a little bit. And I think when you look at the week 2 slate, there are a lot of games that feel like they're sitting on lines that are dangerous. You know, that 7.5, 14.5 that you don't really want to jump at, or you want to jump out in the other direction because it's right above that big time number. And it's something that you'll hear about a lot when it comes to bets, is crossing those big time numbers when some lines shift. And it happened in the Texas Clemson game where you went from 3 points to 7.5. That's a huge flip from you go over 6, you go over 7, and this game changes very quickly in a hurry. But let's start with that game, but I'm not going to go after the line. I think under in this game is a huge bet. 42.5 is the line, and I think when you look at this one, I thought the over-under was spot on when I did this prediction. The closer and closer I get to this game, I think it's going to be an absolute rock fight, at least to start. I think it's one of those games that we could look up at halftime and see kind of a Georgia-Clemson type score, whether it's like 10-3 or maybe even, 6-0. Maybe it's exactly like Clemson, Georgia, where you have a really ugly offense. You have defenses playing really good football early on, and then one team finds it. Whether it's, Michigan or Texas in that second half, one team is able to find it and separate a little bit, but just too much ground to make up in the second half to get to that 42.5 number. So another part of this that I think is getting overlooked, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but Michigan has heard all of the noise. They've heard every single person that isn't wearing a Michigan hat pick Texas in this game and pick Texas to cover in this game, and I did as well. I'm falling into that trap as well, but at the end of the day, I think it's one of those games where the defense knows that they have to play pretty much lights out for them to win this one. The offenses, I think, will be better this week. I think it has so long to go to get to a place where they're going to be able to win games offensively. So the defense knows what they have to do, and I think they're going to come out swinging. I do think Texas wears them down a little bit in the second half and is able to get just enough plays to win this one, but I think this one could be ugly for about 2.5 quarters, and then some offense starts to open up late. Over I like is one that I'm getting caught in a trap here, guys. I feel very confident that I'm getting caught in a trap because it's 35.5. It is the Cy-Hawk Trophy battle, and it's one of those games where the under hits all the time. Picking it over on an Iowa team just feels like an idiotic thing to do regardless. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy into it. And I think the biggest thing for me is this Iowa offense is better. I don't think it's all that much better. I think they're going to come back down to earth slowly throughout this season. But the biggest difference is you have 2 wide receivers that they actually have to worry about. You don't have guys on the outside that you can pretty much just put single coverage, say they're going to be fine out there, and even if they're not fine, the Iowa quarterback isn't going to be able to make that throw. So overall, I think it's one of those things where Iowa isn't all that different than they were a year ago in terms of approach. What they are different in is a little bit of personnel, and that's all they needed to switch. They needed to add more wide receivers into the personnel packages and take out more tight ends. Then you spread out defenses, then things become a little bit easier to run the ball. So I do think it's one of those games that you would obviously look at this and say this is going to be an under. You would obviously look at Iowa and say anything is going to be under regardless of the number. I'm going to get into this one a little bit. I think Iowa State has too many dudes to outright stop, whether it's Noel or Higgins or Sama. I think keeping them under wraps for 4 quarters is just too tall of an order. I don't think it's going to be a shootout by any means, but maybe if you're in terms of the Cy-Hawk Trophy, it's definitely a shootout. I do have it 24-20, so I think it's going to be a really fun game, but at the end of the day, I'm picking a little bit more points in this one than people might expect. Another over I love is that Tennessee-NC State game. I think I look at this game and you have so many different questions about the offense for NC State and the defense for NC State as well. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest question for both of these teams is the back end of those defenses are not good. They're, a little bit young on the Tennessee side. I think on the NC State side, they're just still trying to find themselves. But overall, just don't necessarily have the great personnel they love to have. This is going to be a very interesting game, and I think Tennessee is going to be tested sideline to sideline. When you have someone like Kevin Concepcion on the other side, it's going to be really hard to keep him under wraps the entire game because he can attack you from literally every single point on the field. He could line up in the backfield and make a problem for you, and then right when you feel like you have a beat on getting out to the edge and making those tackles out in coverage, Justin Jolie is going to hit you over the middle on a seam route. So it's one of those moments where I think NC State just has enough counter punches. I don't think they're going to necessarily score a ton of points against Tennessee by any means, but I do think they have the ability to kind of negate the pass rush for Tennessee and get it out on the edge with all of these electric wide receivers and score enough. And then on the other side, Tennessee is just going to dominate the middle of the field in this game. NC State showed no ability to stop the deep crossers, posts that Josh Heupel loves to run, and if Nico can put it the way he was in week 1, it's going to be cruel to the NC State defense. So I expect a lot of points. I think this one's going to be really fun. But at the end of the day, I do think Tennessee wins this one by a comfortable margin. I've been trying to talk myself into NC State, and I think they're going to play much cleaner football this week. I just think it's one of those things where you walk onto the field with a Tennessee offense like this, it's going to be impossible to keep a cap on it. When you have Chris Brazzell and you have Squirrel White, you have Brew McCoy, you have Chaz Nimrod, you have Dante Thornton, a million people is the problem here, where NC State can do everything right on the defensive side of the ball. Everyone can play their assignment. Everyone can be on time and make good tackles and all of that stuff. And then Tennessee can change the game in a second with one big play. So it's one of those games where you look at it, and I love to say that NC State's going to keep it close. And frankly, I think it could be close for a lot of this game. I just think Tennessee's going to make those one or two big plays down the stretch of this game to win this one by 14, 21 points, 17 maybe points in this one. Now, Tony Gibson does rock. We talked about him earlier on the show. He can do a ton, but I don't love the personnel. I just think it's one of those things that you could play call as well as you possibly want to. I don't think you're going to be able to get it done. And then for defense, I think Tennessee just has more dudes. You have James Pierce Jr., you have Bryson Eason, you have Arian Carter, enough guys to make enough plays to give them a little bit of a cushion in this game and give them that extra possession that means a whole lot. And then Boise State, I love BYU plus 11.5 against SMU tonight. I think Friday nights are weird, and I think SMU has still not figured out what that quarterback situation is going to be. No one is talking about BYU coming into this one. This just feels like one of those college football moments. I do like their quarterback, Jake Retzlaff. I think he's a very talented kid and one of those guys that looked clunky last year, but now is comfortable in this offense and is finding Chase Roberts a lot, which is very, very good way to go about business if you're BYU. I think SMU has a good chance in this game to win it, but I think it might just have to be in comeback fashion. I think BYU comes out of the gate pretty fast, and then SMU finds their footing and likely gets a win. But I think it's one of those games tonight that are going to be really sneaky fun, and you're going to want to tune in because I think it's going to be a little bit closer than some people think. I like Oregon to blow out Boise State, and that 21.5 is making me outright terrified to make this pick. I'll be totally honest, because 21 feels like that perfect number, but at the end of the day, I do think this is a statement game for Oregon. Oregon still is Oregon. Like, we talked about this team all offseason as one of the most talented, complete teams in the country. That didn't go away in a week. Now, there are issues that you maybe didn't think were going to happen for Oregon through 1 week, but at the end of the day, they're going to be able to play really good football. I feel really good, really confident in that. I think some of their problems are a little bit longer term, but most of them I think are temporary. And I think Dylan Gabriel's going to come out, be able to play a little bit better. I think they run the ball a lot better against a Boise State defense that was downright bad last week, and I think they have the ability to just pull away in this game. I think they're going to show the AP poll that they belong closer to 3, not to 7, and I think it's one of those games where Dan Lanning's really mad right about now, and I think it's going to show on Saturday. I do have App State covering the spread against Clemson. I talked about this yesterday. Clemson just doesn't have enough offensively for me to feel confident about them pulling away at all against any team in the country right now. It's one of those teams where the freshman wide receivers can come along. There's no doubt about that. Cade Klubnik can play better football, or they can put him in better, more advantageous situations. I don't know if it changes this offense all that much anyway. I think App State has an ability to say, if it's going to be Phil Maffa, fine. We'll take Phil Maffa. We'll take him out of the game. We'll make sure that he is not a factor. Outside of that, just beat us. Just dare Cade Klubnik to beat you, because frankly, he has not done it yet. And I get this isn't Georgia. It's a very different game. But at the end of the day, I really like App State to keep this one close. I do think Clemson is going to win, but I don't think it's going to be pretty at all. I think they're going to walk out of that game feeling really, really precarious about the ACC schedule, and I think everyone's going to be saying it's still Miami and everyone else in the ACC, at least for the time being. I do like Houston to cover this one, and this is another one that makes me scared because Houston played not only bad football last week, just horrific football last week against UNLV. They got dominated in every single aspect of that game, and then Oklahoma on the other side, the O-line was a little bit iffy, but other than that, they were dominant against Temple. So it's making me a little bit nervous, but I think it's one of those games. And I don't think Oklahoma's really going to... I think when you look at this game at the end of it, you look at the box score, you're going to say, okay, Oklahoma took care of business. But I think when you look up at halftime, you're going to see a closer game than you expect. I think Donovan Smith is one of those guys that plays terrible football 1 week, and then plays great football the next, a classic college football quarterback. But I do expect Oklahoma to win. I just think that O-line has just enough holes for Houston to exploit early on in that game, and then they pull away late, win by 17, 21 points. But at the end of the day, Houston is able to at least give them a little bit of a scare in Norman. But a ton of really, really fun games. I think you look at all of these bets, there are a lot that are on some very precarious lines, including that game, which one was I? That Oregon game that's at 21.5 right now. That one scares me a lot, but I do like Oregon to cover that spread. I do think they're going out there to make a statement this week, so we'll continue with that throughout the season. We'll give you an update on how I'm doing, and we'll see if would be a good bettor or not, but I am not necessarily a betting man right now, so I'm not necessarily expecting too much, but going to be really fun to kind of unpack this throughout the season. But I'll give you my my first couple there, and then in the second segment, I do want to get into, or in the next segment, excuse me, I do want to get into all of the questions I have heading into week 2. We have a lot of teams that didn't play all that great or played awesome in week 1. Where does the regression to the mean or progression to the mean happen this upcoming week is something we're going to have to figure out, and we'll do it right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of my best bets for this upcoming week. We will keep up with that throughout the season, and we'll just see how good I can do in this little bet. If you want to follow me, you're more than welcome to. Do not bet any money that you cannot lose. Just plain and simple, do not do that. But at the end of the day, going to be very fun to keep track of, and we'll see if I'm very good at betting or just downright terrible, because I do not know as of right now. But let's get into some questions heading into week 2, and there's so many different things going into week 2, because this is always the week where you kind of figure out who a team is. Week 1 is all about just getting that win, moving on to the next week, and hoping that you're undefeated at the end of it. Week 2 is kind of about showing who you are, showing the way you're going to go about business the rest of the year, and you see a lot of this different kind of not oversimplification, but kind of a regression or progression back to the mean. I couldn't think of another way to put it, but at the end of the day, I do think it's one of those things where you see teams look clunky in week 1, or you see teams look incredible in week 1, and you expect that to happen again in week 2, and then they fall off the face of the earth. It could be Texas falling to Michigan this weekend and maybe looking a little bit clunky on offense. Maybe it's one of those high-powered offensive teams that are doing incredible things like Auburn and Arkansas. Maybe they just fall flat offensively this upcoming weekend. Maybe Tennessee falls to an NC State team that could be able to put them in a precarious situation this upcoming week, and maybe Nico doesn't look like the superhero he looked like in week 1. So it's so many different ridiculous performances in week 1 offensively that I tend to believe that's where you're going to see the biggest step back. You're going to see some of these teams like Alabama and Ole Miss and Auburn and Arkansas and a number of other teams just look a little bit more benign on offense, and some of that is because they're playing better opponents this upcoming week. Some of that is just the reality of college football. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. It's one of those where I think they're going to be able to get a lot of different movement this week. I think there's so many different moments where you look at the game and you think you know what's going to happen, and then things go a little bit of awry. It's one of the things I've talked about throughout this entire week is just this week feels a little bit too straightforward. It feels like everyone's picking Texas to win. Everyone's picking Tennessee to win. Everyone's picking Nebraska to win. And then you're going to show up on Saturday and feel a little bit stupid when some of this stuff goes awry. But it's going to be awesome to watch and see what these guys can do this upcoming week and see if some of these guys take a little bit of a step back in week 2. Also, are we expecting a little bit too much from these young quarterbacks too early? And this is one of those things that I've kind of battled with back and forth early on, at least throughout the last couple of weeks, is you have 2 massive high-profile night games that are going to have 2 quarterbacks that everyone wants to see in prime time so badly, and Dylan Raiola and Nico Iamaleava. Everyone wants to see those guys go to work. Could one of them stumble? I think it's one of those things where we have all this expectation, all of this love for these young guys, but this is still new territory for both of these guys, and it's going to be really awesome to see how they react to it. And normally I would say yes. I think there's a number of examples where you have a guy that comes out of the gate really fast but is really young and then walks into a really tough environment and it looks really weird. It looks clunky, it looks bad, and I think it's happened all across pretty much every single year of college football. And I think you look at those two guys and it's easy to see that happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen on Saturday, but these guys are different. And I can't really quantify it. I can't really explain it. But Dylan Raiola walking out onto that field on Saturday, and I get it was UTEP, don't get me wrong, but walking out onto that field, 100,000 people there to see him. No confusion about that. They were there to see Dylan Raiola in his very first game in Big Red. And he was able to deliver, and he didn't look phased. It wasn't like one of those games where he made a couple of big plays but looked clunky at times. The kid was on money every single time, and it was one of those things where it really opens your eyes to just how much confidence some of these kids have. And I think you look at it on the other side with Nico, he can rip the ball all around the field. And I don't think he's a guy that plays the game remotely scared. And I think it's one of those things where the only way that he could go awry this weekend is if Josh Heupel doesn't believe that he can deliver. If Josh Heupel kind of pulls him away from passing the ball downfield as aggressively and being as aggressive down the field as they want to, because I think that could take him out of a rhythm. And I think this is very much a rhythm quarterback that if you get him throwing those rhythm routes, those timing routes, he's going to tear you to pieces. So it's one of those things where I understand these two guys are going into some big-time areas on Saturday night. They're going to be really under a big-time spotlight. But at the end of the day, both these guys are so steely-eyed demeanor, is so confident, have this ability to not only, take the pressure but thrive off of it, that I'm having a hard time poking holes. Maybe I feel differently on Monday. Maybe they showed me a couple of holes that I don't necessarily love. But as of right now, I think these two guys are just built a little bit differently than normal people and have the ability to totally take over this weekend. The other question I have is one that's been nagging at me all week. Are we writing off Michigan a little bit too fast? I understand everyone wants to. With all of the stuff happening off the field, there's plenty of people that want to see this Michigan, I'm not going to say dynasty, obviously, but this Michigan run come to an end. Everyone wants to see it. Everyone wants to see them fall. But the reality of this team is they are built on some of the most solid foundation of any team in the entire country. When you can run the ball the way that they can, when you're going to be physical at the point of attack, and when you can play defense, you're going to be able to win a lot of games. That's just the plain truth of college football, especially when a lot of people cannot do that by any means. So whether it's Will Johnson or Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant, you have to be able to get enough from your defense throughout this year to be in these games. That doesn't mean that Michigan can't play good football, though. I think one of the big misconceptions with this team is, yes, the offense did take a step back, and you could argue the defense took a slight step back, although I think they're roughly on the same plane as they were a year ago. I think it's one of those things where you're just going to have to get more dynamic, whether that's getting Donovan Edwards in interesting situations out on the edge by himself or using Alex Orji more, which I expect to see a lot more of this weekend. And I think it's one of those moments where Michigan has the ability this week to just prove everyone wrong, to just show everyone that it wasn't about Connor Stalions, it wasn't about Jim Harbaugh, it wasn't about any of that stuff. It was about us. It was about us being the better team on the field, and I think it's going to be a fight, no doubt about it. I do think Texas wins this game, but I think Michigan shows that they're not a team that is going to just fade away into nothingness. They're going to be a team that is going to be tough to beat every single week. Maybe they're not explosive on offense. Maybe they don't absolutely terrify you like the team last year, but they're absolutely a team that can make some noise, and even if they lose this weekend, can be a team that at the end of the year is very much in the playoff conversation. So I just want to make sure everyone is not writing them off too early just because of some of the emotions of what happened last year, just more than anything else. The other part of this, apologies there. The other part of this is, does Oregon have real issues or do they have temporary issues? Because there is an argument to be made for both of them, if I'm being totally honest. In the game in week 1, everything was all over the place. I talked about it earlier. I do expect them to win big this game, but it doesn't mean some of those problems can't linger. When you talk about Dylan Gabriel, they had explosivity with Bo Nix. That was what they did. They ran the ball really effectively. They got Bo Nix in the run game, and then they said, when your safeties come down into the box, we're going to throw over top of you. That was kind of their big equalizer in a lot of these games where maybe things weren't going perfectly, but if you can run the ball just a little bit, then Bo Nix can hit that big play. Dillon Gabriel's not going to be able to do that, at least not to the same degree that Bo Nix did, because he doesn't have as big of an arm. He's more of a put it where it needs to be, execute the offense type quarterback, rather than this game-breaking quarterback like Bo Nix was a year ago. So I think it's one of those things where you just have to see more from him. It doesn't have to be, 50 or 50-yard plays, tons of touchdowns, win by 25 points, but it does have to be efficient. It does have to be push the ball downfield just a little bit more, and I think that's something that can be handled, but might be something they have to deal with throughout this entire year, just finding a way to put together a game plan that puts Dillon Gabriel in good positions to win, rather than saying, we're just going to push the ball downfield because that's what we like to do. And then the other part of this is the O-line, and this is one that I tend to believe is going to be fixed a little bit easier, because I think when Matthew Bedford comes back, it's going to kind of take that pseudo Jackson Powers Johnson situation where you have that interior guy to get that initial push, because that's really all you need is have one guy on that interior to get that initial push, and then the other guys are going to be able to do it. So it's one of those things where I don't love where the O-line is right now. I think when Matthew Bedford comes back, it's going to be a lot better, but it's still a big-time question mark. There's no two ways about that. But then, who walks out of this week with a Heisman favorite? Who is the guy that we walk out of this weekend saying, that's the guy as of right now, he is the number one player on that leaderboard, and we'll see what happens? For me, Quinn Ewers is the easiest answer. If he can go up to Ann Arbor and put together a ridiculous performance and win that game, there's almost no doubt in my mind that he's going to be the guy that everyone's talking about for the Heisman on Monday. But you talk about some of the other guys that have the opportunity. Nico Iamaleava obviously has a huge shot this weekend, where you have an NC State defense, particularly a back end, that you might be able to take advantage of. If he can put up numbers like he did a week ago, it's going to be people going over the moon to put this kid in the Heisman race, and frankly, I would be as well, so I'd be right there with him. But the other way you could go is the guys over in Colorado. There are two guys that in Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter that can totally change this week and become those players that maybe Deion gets his wish, and they're the number 1 and 2 guys on that list on Monday. But at the end of the day, I think these are guys that can totally change the complexion of this game, and particularly Travis Hunter, if he can take things over, is going to be the guy that you look at and say, if he's not the number 1 guy in the Heisman race, we're doing something wrong. And then finally, I wanted to get into something that I've seen floating around the college football Twitter space this week. Is this a weak slate? And it makes me mad kind of saying it, I'll be totally honest with you. But the reality is, there's no such thing. This is college football. Anytime you get to watch college football on a Saturday, you are winning. I don't care if it is a D2 matchup. I don't care if it's a D3 matchup. I don't care if it's high school teams playing with college jerseys on. This is college football. Every time we get to line up on Saturdays, it is a special thing. So whether or not you get all of the incredible games you want, whether or not you think Michigan and Texas is the only big-time marquee game, I don't care. This is college football. Strap them up, get your TVs on. You're going to enjoy this day, because honestly, if I told you in June that we're going to have the Cy-Hawk Trophy on the way, we're going to have Colorado, Nebraska, we're going to have two very high-powered offenses in Tennessee, NC State, and we're going to have two teams that were in the playoff a year ago going at it, you would hug me, and you would be so excited about that happening. So don't take this week any differently. Don't take this week as one that you can take a little bit of time off. You can, walk away for the 3:30 slate, come back for the night slate. College football always finds a way, whether it's a weak slate or whatever. Weak slates don't exist in college football, because the second that you think you have a weak slate, a lot of stuff happens that makes it very not weak in a hurry. So I think it's one of those weeks that you figure out how much people really love college football. I think there are a number of people that are saying this is not a very strong week. You really only have Texas, Michigan, maybe Colorado and Nebraska will be fun, but at the end of the day, there's not too much on the schedule. There's plenty on the schedule, because at the end of the day, there's college football on the schedule, and that's all you need. I don't care what level you're playing at. I don't care how well you're playing. I'm going to be tuned in on Saturday, and I'm going to be watching every single second of it, because you only get so many of these Saturdays every year. take advantage of every single last one of them, even if the slate doesn't grab you quite as much. And I understand the slate isn't quite as strong as some will have down the road, but it's still college football. They still got some incredible games on Saturday, so I don't want to hear any more of that. There's no such thing as a weak slate in college football. If I hear that one more time this year, I'm going to be really mad. We have to make sure that college football is one of those things where it doesn't matter who's playing, doesn't matter when they're playing, doesn't matter how it shakes out. We are locked in because college football is college football. That's all I need. So it's one of those things that just wanted to get that off my chest. Felt like I had to say that. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a weekend headline wrap-up. A number of things happening all around the country that I want to make sure I get on y'all's radar. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest questions heading into this upcoming week, including, is this a weak slate? Doesn't exist in college football, I can promise you that. So no worries about that. You'll have plenty of good games to watch on Saturday. But let's get into the weekend headline wrap-up. There are a ton of big-time things that happened this past weekend. I want to update you on all of them because there were a couple of pretty seismic changes, frankly. And one of them is the House talks have stalled. The House settlement that we've talked about just ad nauseum throughout the offseason with the revenue sharing and everything going forward with player payment, that has been stalled for the time being. It sounds like they're going to have to go back to the drawing board just a little bit and figure out some of the different nuances of this. One of the biggest ones that held up Judge Claudia Wilkin from passing this is it sounds like there is a provision in there that says you can only pay players for valid business purposes. No one really understands what that means, and no one really gets fully what the parameters around that are. So figuring that out, figuring out how you're going to go about that, and also making sure that there's not this, huge cut down on the ability for boosters or for NIL opportunities to pay these players somewhat of a salary, because the reality is a lot of these NIL deals go on for quite some time, and I think it would be one of those worries that maybe they're not doing something for 6 months or for a year or for during the football season, but they're doing stuff down the road, and maybe the NCAA gets involved and says this isn't a valid business purpose because it's not quick enough, or it's not happening soon enough, or you're not doing enough quickly enough. So it's one of those things where I think they just have to iron out those details, make sure that either that is not in the case at all, or that they just kind of revise that and make it a little bit easier to understand. So a little bit of a pause. This is another reason why the NCAA should have started this process about 5 or 10 years ago, because it's going to take time. It's going to take time to figure out what this entire thing looks like, and then putting it into action is going to take even longer. So it's one of those things where it just gives you another idea of why the NCAA has been behind the 8 ball for so long, and why a lot of people around the sport are none too enthused about the NCAA right about now. Moving on to the Big 12 and UConn, it sounds like those talks have stalled as well. It sounds like the Big 12 and UConn are kind of mutually agreeing to part ways for the time being, and we'll see what happens over the next little bit. But at the end of the day, this is one of those things that I am having a hard time being upset about. I'm very much in favor of this because I love me some Big East basketball with UConn in it, and I love keeping certain things special. And I understand we've lost just so much when it comes to regionality and conferences and all of that type of stuff. The thing I didn't love about this one is adding and cutting a athletic department into pieces. I think the Big 12 adding certain sports right now and then football later on, it just felt a little bit sketchy to me and kind of a dangerous road to go down, so I'm a little bit happy that we kind of avoided that for the time being. That being said, the Big 12 is going to be aggressive. Brett Yormark has made it very, very clear to pretty much everyone that's paying attention that he wants teams and he wants to be a player in this entire college football conversation, and he's going to be aggressive going forward. So maybe it's not UConn, maybe it is UConn again down the road, but maybe it's someone different. At the end of the day, you're going to hear about the Big 12 expanding at least in the next 6 to 9 months. I can almost promise you that because this is one of the most aggressive guys in the entire country, and I think he's going to be one of those guys that very much wants to just bolster that before everything goes crazy and the ACC maybe crumbles around him. So going to be really interesting to watch that, but as of right now, will not be UConn heading to the Big 12, at least right now. We'll see what happens later on. But the other part of this that I want to talk about, Mountain West has declined future scheduling with the Pac-12. Going to be a very, very interesting thing and something that frankly we kind of expected. When we walked into this one, it was one of those that you felt really good about the ability for Oregon State and Washington State to set up shop there for a couple of years and then move forward possibly to another conference. But at the end of the day, it sounds like Mountain West over the past, year or so have become a little bit less enthused about that agreement because it sounds like the Pac-12 was just trying to steal a couple of Mountain West teams to come over to the Pac-12 to keep that thing going. And I don't think the Mountain West loved that too much. And frankly, I don't think the Pac-12 has nearly the amount of brand value as the Mountain West at this point. And I know that sounds crazy to say given what the Pac-12 was a couple of years ago, but the reality is they don't have much power. When you're talking about the Pac-12 right now, you're looking at Oregon State and Washington State and no one else. It's not like they have a ton of other people that can bolster them from behind. This is not a very, very strong brand, and I think they're in a position now where if you're the Pac-12 schools, you're in panic mode. I think you officially have to be in panic mode because right now you don't even have guys to schedule for next year. So you have to figure out what to do. I think you call the Big 12, you take the deal, and then you figure out where you're going to go from there because otherwise I think you fall off a cliff. I think you become teams that we remember in 20 years. You're like, oh yeah, they played in the Pac-12. That was kind of fun back in the day. And then we don't remember them for the next 20 years. So it's one of those things that I really want these teams to be a part of the fabric of college football, but the chances for them to do that going forward are slipping away one by one. So going to be interesting to watch how they develop, this develops and how they handle this. But as of right now, I think they got to get on in a hurry and make sure that they are in any type of conference going forward. But moving on, Sharon Moore, a very interesting piece came out yesterday. Apparently, he is coaching without a full contract. Now, this isn't the craziest thing in the world. There are a number of different things that have happened. It's called a memorandum of understanding, and it's something that happens across the country. It's not necessarily overly rare, but it is something that doesn't happen all that often. It's not necessarily, commonplace by any means, but I do think it's going to be one of those things that is just weird to me more than anything else. I saw this headline, and I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with this, as long as Michigan is not going to, handle this bad on the back end. But I think it's just weird more than anything else. You have a football team that's undergoing so many differences, has so much outside noise, has an NCAA investigation over their head. If I'm a head coach of that team, I want it in writing. I want to make sure that I have it in pen that I'm getting paid this amount of money for this amount of time, because as of right now, with that NCAA investigation, obviously it's kind of wrapping up, but who knows? More information can come out tomorrow, and then it ramps right back up, and then Sharon Moore is the guy that doesn't have a contract, that is the face of this program, and that was involved in those cases, that they can kind of just kick to the curb and say, we handled the problem. And it's one of those things that I don't know that that's going to happen. I think Sharon Moore and Michigan have a very good relationship, and hopefully that does not occur. But that was kind of the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this was this has got to make it easier to possibly fire him at the end of the year if the NCAA comes down on him a little bit harder than you're expecting. So it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. Obviously, respect to Sharon Moore for doing this, because I don't think there's a lot of people across the country that would do this. But at the end of the day, could open some precarious doors for Michigan at the end of the year. I want to talk about Quentin Moore here for a second. This is a very, very interesting story and very sad story more than anything else. Quentin Moore is a tight end for Washington, and he was making a play in midfield in the Weber State game in Week 1, and there was a player that ran off the sideline and tackled him from the side, and he ended up injuring his knee. He's going to be out for some time, and it's one of those plays that I understand that it's the heat of the moment. I understand that a lot of people just want to make a play. I understand they had 10 players on the field, so it was someone trying to get on the field late. But at the end of the day, someone has to be punished for this. Whether it's Weber State's head coaches or it's the player or someone, this is so dangerous. It's one of those plays where that just cannot happen. Just plain and simple. It can't happen on a coach's perspective. You have to make sure you know where your kids are, especially the ones that should be on the field and they're not. You have to make sure you know where they are, and you have to make sure they are not running on the field after the play started. And then from the player's perspective, I understand you want to make a play. I totally get that, and I understand that it's hard for me to sit here and say I fully understand what goes through your head in that moment. What I can say is that was really dangerous. And what I can say is that kid made a terribly, terribly bad decision, and not punishing him at all, I think would just set a really bad precedent. So I don't know what's going to happen with this. I don't really know how they're going to handle this and if the kid's going to get suspended or if the players or if the coaches are going to get punished. But at the end of the day, it's just one of those stories you hate to see. It's one of those stories that really kind of makes you a little bit mad at the end of the day because football is dangerous. You know that this reality exists. But when it happens like this, when it happens in a circumstance that it should never happen in, it makes you all that more angry. So it'll be interesting to watch this. Hopefully he can get healthy as quickly as possible and get back on the field, and hopefully that Weber State player never does that again. But definitely a really tough story from Week 1 and hoping that he can find his way. But let's talk about John Emery. He tore his ACL this past weekend, and this is another one that just when you read the headline, your heart just drops because this is a kid that has been through just about everything that you can imagine in college football. He has had academic struggles. He has had been in the transfer portal a couple of different times and found his way back to LSU. He's had a number of injuries, including another ACL tear in his right knee. So the dude has just been torn to pieces all the way throughout his career. And if you remember him coming into college, this was one of those guys. This was one of those guys that was one of the most talented players in the country. Felt like he was going to be a Leonard Fournette type character at LSU. Maybe not from a physicality perspective, but in terms of what he was capable of doing at LSU, it was through the roof. There's no doubt about that. And he has been hit and battered every single direction. So more on Josh Williams, more on Caleb Jackson to make plays in that backfield, but man, this was a really talented player, and he showed it on Sunday against USC, made some really, really good plays, but his season comes to an end yet again, and he's one of those guys that you just love to see on the football field. So hopefully he can make some type of recovery, get back on some type of football field. We'll see what happens with that, but just another injury and a long line of them early on in the season that just hits you the wrong way, makes you feel a little bit nauseous for this kid, and just kind of makes your heart drop just a little bit when you see it. So hoping for a speedy recovery there, hoping he gets back on the football field and shows his just ridiculous ability when he is healthy, but just incredibly bad luck for this kid throughout his college career. Finally, I want to talk about USC. They are retiring Caleb Williams, number 13, and people had some things to say about it. They were saying 8-5 gets you a retired jersey. They were poking all types of fun, but I promise you, you lift that Heisman Trophy at USC, you're getting your number retired. That's just the reality of that place, and it honestly should be at a number of places because winning a Heisman Trophy is not an easy thing to do and obviously adds to the history of that university. So huge respect to Caleb Williams. He's one of those guys that in college football was always such a fun watch every single week, and cannot wait to see him and his debut this upcoming weekend for the Bears. But overall, I think a layup of a decision. And then also another layup. They get to recognize Reggie Bush this upcoming weekend, and it's going to be awesome. It's one of those moments that I know Reggie has waited for so long because he was essentially excommunicated from the program for quite some time. But this is a really, really good guy. This is a guy that has battled to get his Heisman back and now gets to stand in the spotlight and take the very much needed respect that he deserves. So very much like this. Cannot wait to see all of that unfold for USC. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an awesome week 2. It's one of those that everyone talks about the week slate. Everyone talks about Michigan, Texas being the only big one. Everyone talks about the 3:30 slate being not quite as good. put all that aside. Bring out all your TVs, get everything going, get into this college football Saturday, and at the end of it, I promise you will not be saying it was a week's late. I can almost promise you that. So if we come back on Monday and it was a week's late, then I will apologize. But college football always finds a way. So definitely tune in this weekend. Enjoy it. It's going to be so much fun. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every sport you could want. The NFL started yesterday. We got plenty of people covering that. We got baseball covered all season. We have, I think, tennis coming here pretty soon. So anything in the world of sports, you can come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. Enjoy some sports this weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday.